All right, so what we wanted to talk about today is actually chapter 1. So it's an introduction to environmental science and also starting to lead towards sustainability. What this class is about, and Mr. Haffan and my main goal is for you guys to understand and learn and take responsibility that we do have a role in our sustainability as a society. And we think this is really important. We think that things aren't going well. We're overusing our natural resources. Our social systems are struggling. And we think that we can do a lot, especially Americans can do a lot. So my main goal is to kind of stimulate people to take an interest, take responsibility, and then actually do something about some of these issues, rather than just being sort of getting to a state of despair because we hear about all this doom and gloom and climate change and all of those kinds of things. So Lester Brown has this very nice quote. This comes from the book. No civilization has survived the ongoing destruction of its natural support system, nor will ours. And so we're going to start talking about that natural support system and also actually our man-made support system. So some of the principles of sustainability, we're going to get to the definition of sustainability in just a moment, but some of the principles are, and the background to it is, we first of all have to understand what environmental science is. And so environmental science is really the understanding and the study of the connections between our man-made environment and our natural environment, right? We in the high desert are fortunate because we live closer to the elements. We can get outside and experience nature. So we have a bit of a better understanding and possibly feel for this. But for example, our man-made environment is your school, where you guys are sitting right now. Education is really important. That's a man-made environmental thing. So we have to understand how that works. We have to understand how a government works. We have to understand a little bit about how environmental policies work, for example. And then there's the natural environment that provides us all the services to live. You turned on the faucet this morning and nice, clean, drinkable water came out of the tap. Well, how does that work? We're going to learn how that comes from underground. I don't know if you guys realize this, but all of our water up here that you're using on a daily basis comes from groundwater, comes from underneath our feet. Okay? So environment is everything around us. Environmental science is a very interesting kind of a science because it's very interdisciplinary. We are going to be looking at, I want to say one more thing there. Environmental science, difference between it than biology or ecology is we are going to put man back in the middle. Environmental science basically says man's disrupted this because we're trying to live, we're trying to feed our kids and all that kind of stuff. But if we put man back in the middle of it, then man, if he takes responsibilities, man and woman, can find solutions. Okay? So the interdisciplinary part is natural sciences. So those are ecology, the study of our ecosystems, how they work, biology, geology, very important, what's going on in our landscapes and under the ground. Social sciences, things like geography that studies how our demographics and our social systems work. Political science is huge, and we're going to have a couple of weeks, we'll have Dino Bozanellis, our political science partner, come in and talk about how important political science is in environmental sciences and in sustainability. And then the humanities. This is the part that doesn't even get talked about in the natural sciences, is philosophy. What do we really think about this? Do we really care about other people and other environments, or are we just prepared to say, that product's produced in China, let's just roll with it. I think I need that next piece of technology or next piece of junk that I'm going to buy, and it's not our responsibility to worry about whether that's affecting people's health, the way that things produced in another country. Okay, and ethics. Is it ethical for us to be using genetically modified organisms, right? To feed GMOs, to feed our children and other children, because it's easier for farmers to produce more and maybe to make more money. Okay, so how ethical is that? And based on the situation, is it ethical in some situations and not in others? So environmental science is this very broad look at this, with the idea that we need to be more sustainable. We need to leave something for the future. So let's go to that, I think, right here, a little bit more, and then we'll go to the actual definition of sustainability. Goals of environmental science: learn to live on Earth, learn how life on Earth has survived and thrived, and understand how we, people, interact with the environment. Okay? And ultimately, we want to find ways to deal with the environmental problems and live more sustainably. Ecology, on the other hand, which often gets confused with environmental science, is the study of ecosystems, those living organisms, how they interact with each other. Okay? We are going to do a lot of ecology, by the way. The first 5 chapters and first 5 weeks, 6 weeks maybe, are ecology, because we have to understand, again, how those natural systems actually work. Okay? So environmental science, as I said, is made up of man-made and natural life support systems. So over here on the, I don't know if you can see that pointer, but over here on the left, we have things that are really important for us to live. We all know that here in the desert, a day without water, and we're in a lot of trouble. We know that air quality, especially with us getting all kinds of nasty things flushed up the pass with us with the winds, is very important. Soils and rocks are important. And all the little chojos and bugs and animals are really important, because we know they all have a part. They're all part of balancing our ecosystems. But then over here in this one, change that to the man-made life support systems. Things like population size are really important. Things like what are your worldviews and your ethical stand are really important. Our economics, what kind of economic system we do and how much focus we have on that. And what the political system and politics. Do we, for example, have policies and laws in place to protect animals that are in danger of extinction? Well, in this country we do, the Endangered Species Act. And how do we deal with that? Sometimes it's used positively, and sometimes we don't agree with the way it's used. But how do we use politics, the political system, to make our world work? Okay, sustainable development. So if you notice the name of the class, it's environmental science and sustainability. So sustainability is this idea, we'll see in a moment, came in very recent times, last 30 years, came out of the United Nations, basically as other countries of the world, especially what we call the third world countries, the less developed countries, we're saying, hey guys, you know, if we're going to have a future, you can't just be coming to us and saying, hey, you know, please don't cut down your rainforests. And the reason we're cutting down the rainforests is to in Brazil, for example, to grow beef for you for McDonald's, or we're using that lumber to make shipping pallets out of. And you guys are basically taking our resources and we're not getting anything back. Our people are suffering, our economics are suffering. So basically, the basic idea behind sustainability, and this is the main definition, which is this first one, which is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay? And I think we all have a sense, no matter how much you've thought about this, that we haven't been doing this. And for different reasons. Sometimes you're so desperate just to stay alive that you have to use something up completely. I just got back from 5 weeks in South Africa, where I'm from, and people there just have to use the land to the maximum, and they're destroying things, but it's because they basically just have to live. They have to feed their families. So over here, I think we do it more out of greediness, a lack of understanding, a lack of caring. Okay? Another definition is the search for ecological stability and human progress that lasts over the long term. So you're getting two themes starting to develop here, is this looking ahead, long-term focus, not day by day, month to month, okay? And here's the sentiment that basically started this all. This is President Mbeki, the second president of South Africa after it switched over to majority rule. When I grew up in South Africa, unfortunately, blacks weren't allowed to vote at all, even though they're 90-something% of the population. And President Mbeki said, to be truly enduring, which means sustainability or development, must be available to all humans, not just the privileged. And so as you go through this, I think you'll start to realize just how privileged we are here. So that's something to be thankful for, but it's not something to be abused. So one of the ways that we do that is to become better consumers, more aware, and not as wasteful. Okay, so right here, your first assignment is your definition of sustainability. You can use some of these words and ideas, but basically the assignment is what's your definition, why are you interested, why are you not interested, what do you think this means? I'll just give you one example I got from a group of Lucerne Valley High School students, really personalizing this. They basically, one student said, well, sustainability is like your mom. So, and this is Mother Nature, and if we make Mother Nature mad, basically bad things happen. Just like if you don't treat your mother properly or aren't respectful, bad things are going to happen. So that was just a very personalized approach. Start thinking about what this really means to you, is what we're trying to do with that assignment. Okay? Want to point these out to you right here? Can you guys see the pointer, by the way?
No.
Okay, all right. Well, on the right of the screen, you have the environmental, social, and economic. I hope this is still recording. Yeah, it is. Okay. You have the environmental, social, and economic spheres, and we're going to be talking about this. The difference in sustainability here is we're saying if you put man in the middle, then yes, we're supposed to be good stewards and understand and take care of the environment, but we also need to take care of social needs, and people need to be treated with equity and have opportunity. And then third thing is people have to have economic stability as well, and healthy economics and jobs and things like that. So when you take those three spheres of our lives, humans' lives, and you put them together and balance them, then right in the middle you get SD, that stands for Sustainable Development. Okay? And that's what we're trying to strive for. And sometimes it balances in different ways. What I often say to people is that social sphere in the United States is kind of small. We don't really pay much attention to that. We're not giving enough attention to education and healthcare. We are very focused, even especially today, maybe on our present political group. We're very focused on economics. Do we have enough money? It's all about money. Do Americans have enough money? Well, that's important, but you shouldn't neglect certain groups of people with their basic needs. And are we focused on the environment? Are we making sure that we're good caretakers, good stewards of the environment? And this varies depending what context, what area you're in, what country you're in, but we can find a balance. And people have found a balance all over the world where things are more sustainable. And they do have a long-term approach. And yes, it's not easy, but they can look forward and say, okay, we're using our forestries to be sustainable into the future. Costa Rica is a country that's done this, where their forests are actually being reforested to a huge degree, and they're very careful how they harvest the trees and use the trees. And so that particular resource, I think they can say, is absolutely sustainable at the moment. In fact, it's getting stronger, their forests, which is obviously a lot of people go on ecotourism to Costa Rica is because of those amazing rainforests. Okay? So what we're going to be asking in this class is, What is your role? Can you make a difference at all, or should you just grab another packet of potato chips and sit on the couch and say, oh man, there's nothing I can do about this. I just hope that it doesn't get too hot and fry up everything too soon, okay? What is the role of education? That's a very important thing, at least in educating ourselves. And does your lifestyle have to suffer? We'll be talking a bit, and I'll bring into class. My wife and I chose to build a totally off-the-grid house built out of straw bales out here in the desert. And I would say we have a better lifestyle. I was sitting on the porch early this morning, just enjoying our little valley. Yes, I have to run out and start a generator to pump our water, and there's a few things, but I would say that living closer to nature and in harmony with nature is actually super rewarding. And it's something in my spiritual beliefs that is actually built into us. We do understand that we're all co-created and we need to take care of these things. Okay? So it feels good. Don't have to go and move and live in a tree house somewhere and throw away all your technology and your cell phone. Okay? My introduction real quick. I grew up in an absolute wonderland in South Africa. Africa, only other country that has the richness that I've seen that Africa has is the United States. But it's an amazing place. And I grew up open space. We were farmers in Africa. We lived in a very wild area. I had natural forest coming right up to our back door. And I tell people I grew up like a little bushman or a little Zulu because I only had 2 white friends my own age, but they lived 10 miles away and 15 miles away. And so we would meet on horseback. But I grew up with the Zulu families that worked on our farm. We had 3 Zulu families, and that's how I grew up. So amazing. I studied animal science and animal physiology both in South Africa at Natal University. It's now called KwaZulu-Natal because it's where the Zulu nation lives. And then I also studied animal physiology at Colorado State University, focusing specifically on reproduction, embryo transfer, artificial insemination, that kind of stuff. Had some amazing experience as a kid. I got to work with a lot of the parks and that, even in research kinds of situations when I was going through college. Thought that I was going to be a game ranger at one point and work in that full time. And so I have this real passion, and I've grown up, even though I'm a different kind of scientist, an animal scientist, I have this real passion for the environment and teaching sustainability. But I wouldn't call myself an environmentalist in the sense that I realize that man has to use these resources. And we were farmers, so we had to use the land, but we had to use it wisely. And we had to be good conservationists, good managers, for example, to make sure that the antelope, the buck as we call them on our farm, in our area, and the monkeys all had their part of the ecosystem. And you can balance that. It can be done. And farmers in South Africa, especially today, I just got back from visiting our farm, which is long since been sold. But it's part of a 2,000 hectares, so about almost a 5,000 acre private game reserve, game park, basically a conservation area, which is quite incredible. So farmers do understand the land, and they can be the greatest conservationists out there, just as some of the other people we don't quite understand, like hunters or miners. They are people of the land, and we're going to be looking at seeing how everyone can do their part. Okay, living green, I told you a little bit about this. This is an early picture of our house. It's now built out. I'll try to get you some more recent pictures. And my wife, Tammy, and my dog, Tombi, we went out there and just kind of made it happen. We built most of it ourselves, and it was an amazing experience. It took us 8 years. We just finished last year. And it was kind of like, put your money where your mouth is. Either go do it or quit talking about sustainability and living green. And it's been a great experience. Okay, so 3 scientific principles. This is in the book. We're going to go through them quickly. I'm just introducing these to you. One of the principles that's behind sustainability from the environmental side, scientific side, is we use the sun. Natural systems, everything is driven by the sun, right? We think, oh, well, wind. Well, wind's driven by the sun, ultimately, by producing high pressures. So that's where we get all our heat and our energy in the natural system. Why not take that and build it into our man-made system? So our house has photovoltaic, taking sunlight, producing electricity panels that drives our energy. And our heat is, to heat the house, we have solar water panels where water is heated by the sun and goes through our foundation to drive the heat for the house in the winter. Okay, so we need to mimic nature. You're going to hear a lot about mimicking nature. Nature does all these things already. We, to some extent, have become a little too smart for our own good, and we are out here trying to do different systems. So we've got very dependent in this area on fossil fuels, right? And now we're realizing that, hey, that's very short-sighted. That stuff's running out, oil, coal, and also there's some serious side effects to that that we need to look at. And we're starting to see, partially because of that behavior, that we're seeing some climate change. Okay? Biodiversity, biological diversity, it's valuing everything that is around us in terms of the natural life and realizing they all have a place and we need to keep them healthy and not have them go extinct because they're very important to the stability. It's like that game Jenga where you pull out the blocks. Well, if you think of each species we pull out of a block, a pyramid or structure in a Jenga game, each one we pull out, we're destroying the stability of that ecosystem, and it will collapse. And we've had some collapses all over the world. Most well-known ones are some of the fishing systems where humans depend totally on fishing. Lake Malawi in Africa depend totally on fish. Those people do for their livelihood and for their protein. And overfishing is causing that whole ecosystem to collapse. Okay? Biodiversity is not just that, it's the genes, the genetic makeup, the organisms and the species, and the ecosystems. We're going to have a whole 2 chapters on this, so we'll go. Chemical cycling or nutrient cycling is the idea that everything in nature recycles. The most common one you'll think about is the water cycle. Okay? We use it, we drink it, we perspire it, it follows the water cycle and eventually comes back around. And we need to, again, mimic those cycles. We tend to build something, some little gadget that we probably don't need in the first place, use it, and then dispose of it. It's linear. We're consumers. We're just wasting it at the end of the day. And where does it go? It goes to a dump. Well, if it's going only to a dump, then that's linear. It's not recycling. Whereas if we follow this, we should be able to recycle most of the resources, or reuse or repurpose, the famous 3 R's of waste management. Okay, and we will get to that later. Okay, solar energy, chemical cycling, biodiversity. 3 basic principles that we're going to learn in this class. First part of the class, we're going to learn about them up until the 8th week, 7th week, and then we're going to start learning the actual sustainable practices where we put them into place. So if we're going to be better users of water, and we use water, a very large percentage of our water, a little over 1/3 of our water in California is to irrigate crops, produce food. How do we do that better? Well, sustainable practices are simple things like drip irrigation. Instead of flooding the land and having most of that water evaporate before it gets to the plant, we are now going to have little drip emitters that drop water right at the root zone of those plants. And it's so much more sustainable. We're going to visit at the end of the class, we're going to visit the most high-tech irrigation system that's out there right now, out in Hinckley. We have an example of the most high-tech irrigation system. So that's going to be one of our field trips. Okay, this is a really key slide. Natural capital. We're going to define that more in a moment, but natural capital is all the capital, all the stuff that nature gives us. So it's the air, the soil, the water, for example, and what the services are that they give us. Well, let's just look at soil. What does soil do for us? It provides the nutrients to grow food. Okay, so that's the natural service that it produces. What does soil do as well? It also filters the water that we've possibly and have polluted. It'll filter out a lot of those pollutants. That's a service. Put those all together and that's natural capital. If you think about capital, the word itself, we normally are talking about economic capital. When you start a new business, you need the building, you need the people, you need the money to start that. But in society, in the big scheme of things, yes, we need that kind of man-made capital, but we also need this natural capital, and we need to take care of it. Next concept that's really important, and it sounds kind of silly, but it's so important, is if we put man in the middle and we realize that there's 8.2, somewhere, whatever, it depends who you listen, somewhere close to 8 billion people, we are going to degrade that capital. We have to use it, and when you use it, it gets degraded. So you can't probably see this slide, and I think this figure is still in your book, but this is a beautiful, old-growth, diverse, tropical forest. It's in this little circle here. Old school would be, hey, there's 10, 15% of the trees in there that are extremely valuable. They're hardwoods. They can be used for paper. They can be used for all kinds of building houses. But the way we're going to manage that is we're just going to come and cut it all down, clear cut it. This is a practice in non-sustainable forestry called clear cutting. Okay? And we're going to cut it all down. And really what happens is most of the rest of this forest goes to waste. And so it's really kind of sad. Actually, if you've been around forestry much, and I was just in South Africa where they do this a lot, they burn everything else. It gets wasted. Okay? Whereas we could have a sustainable practice, and this forestry company could be a sustainable forestry company, and they could come in and just selectively cut the big trees out. Okay? And then harvest those. It costs them a little bit more, but sustainable forestry products can sell for more. They can put a stamp on them. You go to Lowe's, you'll see the Forest Service Council stamp on some of that lumber. And if you're a smart consumer, you'll buy that because you know that they've harvested that lumber and worked with those forests in a sustainable way. Okay? So that's the solution. We do have the solution. We have tons of science, tons of technology. One of my friends developed the technology to go in, and it's a crane system. It goes between tree and tree to actually pull out those big trees from in deep canyons on steep sides, so they don't have to put in roads and all that kind of stuff. Okay, solutions. There are going to be some trade-offs, right? The company that's doing it is going to have higher expenses, probably. It's going to be harder work. Okay, there are going to be some trade-offs in these things, and we need to accept them. We can't just have our little corner of the world and keep it totally pristine. We've got to share it with everyone else, and there are going to be some trade-offs. Okay? Last one is the most important one, and that's individuals matter. So as a worldview and as a thinking, we need to be really looking and say, not just our little segment, Apple Valley, Lucerne Valley, Victorville, but the whole world, all the people matter, and we need to respect and encourage them and give them equity in certain things, and that we can make a difference. So two things to point out. We must have an attitude change and the ability to adapt our behaviors or their behaviors, our behaviors. And the other thing to know about this is the main steps towards sustainability, is that it must be supported by sound science. And we do have a lot of good science about how the environment works, how these kinds of sustainable forestry systems work. But we need to take a systems approach. And real quick, a systems approach means we look at the whole big picture. One of the examples I give of that is the Mojave Desert. Amazingly biodiverse place. You might not think it's so great just living here in this part of it, but please get out and see how fantastic this place is out, especially if you get out towards the east. We often just focus in on certain parts of it, certain areas, or one of the things that we've done is focus on the endangered species, the desert tortoise. Well, that's all good and well, but if all our management, our conservation efforts are towards that one species, we're going to leave out some other key parts. And you're going to write your second discussion board when we leave out a whole group of people, and that were the cattle ranchers, when they were told that they couldn't graze their cattle anymore in the Mojave Desert, especially in the Bureau of Land Management land, because it was causing problems for the desert tortoise. Okay? And the point is, neither one's right or wrong. The point is that there's a balance in there. And did we achieve an appropriate balance? Okay? Natural capital, real quick, go over that. It's the natural resources, the air, the water, the soil, and it's the natural services that they provide. Soil renew, water and air purification. So natural capital is huge. We're going to really think about our systems in a different way, because we're going to really value this and figure out how we can take better care of that. Okay, here's a quick little slide. By the way, these PowerPoints, once you get on Blackboard, they'll all be available to you. Mr. Haffan, I probably would just, maybe you have this from before, but I can hand carry this over to you, just so that you should be able to put this up on their learning system as well, right?
Yeah, as long as you give me a Blackboard, anything you put on Blackboard, I can stick in my mentor.
Yeah.
I have last year's materials there, including the introduction.
Good. Okay.
Everything.
All right. So I should just put this stuff back on that same. So you've just looked and you can still access last year's class.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I've updated this PowerPoint just a little bit, so I'll do that and I'll send you an email. Okay.
Thank you.
So we've already talked about this. Sustainability has certain key components. The human activities, the degrading that has to happen. We can't put a fence around everything. That's an idea called preservation, and it can happen in certain places. But my thinking on that is we have so many people and we need the land so much that there's not room for much preservation. We actually have had a lot of preservation happen in the Mojave Desert over the last few years, in that they formed a whole bunch of wilderness areas. Wilderness area is a special designation of a very limited use by man, okay? And there's big tracts of land that were Bureau of Land Management out in the West that have been put into preservation, into wilderness, which basically you limit it, you kind of keep it pristine. But most part of the world can't afford to do that. We just happen to have a lot of land out here that was government owned, and it wasn't really being used for much else and can't be used for much else other than its natural, its use as a natural system for hiking in, walking in, and just preserving. Okay. Other thing we're going to look at real quick, we're going to look at some other principles of sustainability that come from the social sciences, from the social sphere. Okay? Things like in economics, we want full cost pricing. And real quick, we're not going to get into this to a large degree because I need to check the time here. How much more time do we have, Mr. Haffan?
Have as long as you want to take today.
Oh, awesome. Okay, well, we'll finish it up then. But anyway, economics, full cost pricing. Normally what you pay at Walmart or Kmart or anything, you're basically just paying the basic cost, the economic cost. But what about the environmental costs? In China, what streams and waters were polluted, for example? And I'm not just picking on China, even in this country, to produce that. What people were had to suffer to produce that product? Were they properly paid? Was there a proper healthcare system for them? Were their children properly educated? That's full cost pricing. We need to start thinking about these products of what they really cost. Then that'll allow us to manage them better, manage things better. Politics, we need to look for these win-win results where we can balance and make trade-offs. Okay? Ethics, we need to take responsibility to future generations and really look at questions like GMO, genetically modified organisms. Is that really what we want to go? Or burning only fossil fuels to produce our energy? Do we really think that's actually ethical in the sense towards future generations? Or are we just concerned, make sure that we're happy and warm and have air conditioned on us all day long? Or is there more to it? And is ethics important? And we all know that it is, but it's easy to ignore. Okay, real quick, resources. What are we talking about? Anything obtained from the environment to meet our needs and wants. This is a natural resource, is what we call that, right? Our department here is called Agriculture and Natural Resource Management, okay? And there's two kinds. They're either directly available or not directly available, okay? And they're also, more importantly, they're renewable and non-renewable, okay? So real quick, we'll see, can anybody over there give me an example of a renewable resource?
Loud.
Say that again.
Renewable resource. So I'm just telling them to speak loud.
Okay.
Renewable resource?
Water.
Water? Okay, say it.
Water.
Water. Okay, yeah. Only thing is that's really good about that, you should have said water instead of water, right? No, just joking. When I go to Del Taco, which is my favorite place because it's so cheap, and I say, could I, always want the free water, and I say, could I have the complimentary water? And they're like, what? And then I say, no, water, and then they still don't. And then I say H2O, and that doesn't even seem to help. So anyway, I say things slightly different. So no, absolutely, that's renewable. We just talked about the hydrological cycle. It renews itself. We don't get any more of it, but it renews itself, right? What's a non-renewable resource? Coal, absolutely. Those are our fossil fuels, right? There's X amount of them in the ground. Once we use them, they're gone. Only thing we can do is use them wisely. So we can prevent waste, and where possible with minerals, we can recycle, reuse, and all that kind of stuff, right? Okay. So renewable resource, replenish naturally, forest, grasslands, fresh air, fertile soil, water. And now the big thing is, how do we keep this renewable resource renewable and healthy? Well, we look at a very simple idea, which is sustainable yield, okay? So we were focusing on that forest. If you grow man-made forests, and there's a lot of these in South Africa, called plantations. We don't have a lot of natural forest in South Africa. It's not that as wet in most places to do that. So we plant forests. We plant pines, and we plant eucalyptus or gum trees that are used for building, for paper, all these things. They have about a pine plantation has about a 40-year life. It takes 40 years for a pine tree to grow up. So if we cut those forests quicker as a whole than a 40-year cycle, we then destroy that resource. It's not sustainable, okay? If we take the soil, if we overplant, we plant only one crop, we over-cultivate, we're going to use up all the nutrients in that soil before they can naturally replenish. How does soil replenish itself? Guys got any ideas? This is a question for you guys. Okay. What it does is that basically the rocks and the recycling of the minerals, that chemical cycling, they make themselves available. They break into a form that the roots can use it. Now, it takes a long time. Or organic matter, living matter, compost, manures, those get put back in the soil and they decompose and release those nutrients back. They release the nitrogens and the carbon that are required for growth, okay? So if we use the soil faster than it can do that, then the soil basically dies, and it's not a sustainable yield. We're over harvesting that resource. Basically, we're overusing it. Okay, so we can use a renewable resource without reducing the available supply. Well, what is that? That's just a decision. That's management, and sometimes helping people to have the right kind of practice. Let's teach people how to do drip irrigation. That's what our department does. We have a landscape irrigation class teaching the public and professionals how to do this, because it's a decision that we make as a society to how we're going to use these resources. Okay? Non-renewable resources, energy resources, the fossil fuels, metallic mineral resources, non-metallic mineral resources, and one of the ways, not the only way, we build things that last, have a long life cycle, but we can also reduce, reuse, and recycle our use of those renewable things, which also means we can practice conservation. Okay? We don't need to turn every light in Apple Valley on all night long. I turn all my lights off at night. And I think the bad guys are just as scared to walk up to a dark house as they are to a lighted house. But point is, we think about these things and we don't waste resources. Okay? Countries differ in their resource use and environmental impact. And real quick, this is from chapter 1, I think a little bit, but also chapter 14. We measure the success of a country on what's called the gross domestic product. All the goods and services we produce. That's totally economic sphere, you guys. That's not looking at anything else. Whereas, and we say, oh, you know, China's doing great. They have somewhere around a 15 to 20% GDP, gross domestic product. That's a growth economy. And United States not doing so great right now because we're at, 4% or whatever it is. Well, that's only looking at one sphere. We're not looking at the health of the social sphere or the environmental sphere. We're just focused over here. And that's a very short-sighted way to do it. If we're going to look at the progress of a country, how are they really doing, we could use something called the genuine progress indicator, which looks at some of those other things. What are we doing? What are some of the other benefits we're creating, in terms of childcare and education, and what are we doing for the environment, and what are we creating, and or what are the costs of that GDP? So that's a genuine progress indicator, and you'll be looking at that. So it's a different way of looking at our progress and our success as a particular country or as a society in general. Okay. Another thing we just want to talk about a lot is don't want to be arrogant about it, but this is the terminology. It kind of sounds arrogant, I think. We have more developed countries, and we call them first world. I don't think because you're in a first world country makes you any happier. In fact, I'm pretty sure it doesn't. Just maybe creates more worries for you. We have less developed, this is a mistake on the slide, I need to change that, should be third world countries. And those are a lot of the ones in Africa, Asia, Latin America. But that's just some terminology that's used in the environmental sciences and other things. Okay? We are living unsustainably. We all know this. We're wasting, depleting, degrading the Earth's natural capital and also its man-made capital. Our schools and our governments and our healthcare services are not necessarily improving. If you go to a place like South Africa, those are deteriorating very, very fast. And that's that's where they're trying to focus, is more on the man-made capital side. Okay? So there's just some of the ways that we're causing this this is just the natural capital degrading, soil erosion, aquifer depletion. We're going to talk a lot about this because we depend on aquifer for our water supply. We have a very interesting management conservation technique, and we do a really good job of preventing aquifer depletion, pulling too much water out of the groundwater, out of the ground, before it can replenish. Where is it being replenished from? Either from rainfall, or mostly it seeps under the ground from the mountains, from the snow and rain in the mountains. Whoop. Declining ocean fisheries, water pollution. These are all ways that we're overusing our natural capital. Okay? Okay, so real quick, some more terminology. When we talk about, we're on to pollution now. When we talk about source of pollution, they can be point sources, come from one spot. Why is that important? Because we sometimes need to know who the bad guys are. And so the air quality management district that we have up here, they'll be able to say, oh, that's that smokestack from, let's say, the dog food manufacturer over here. They were creating some nasty smells for the people in Spring Valley Lake at one point. They could identify it as a point source. They know where to go. Others are dispersed, like fertilizer runoff. It could be all the farms alongside a certain river are over-fertilizing and allowing their fertilizer to run off into the streams and to cause algae buildup and oxygen depletion and basically polluting the streams. Okay? Types of pollutants, obviously, biodegradable, non-degradable. Of course, where do we want to be? Biodegradable, if possible. The natural systems can actually degrade them, decompose them, basically. These ones stick around forever. The big ones we're struggling with now in our world are things like pharmaceuticals and hormones, because they continue through in the water supply. They are never, a lot of them take a long time to degrade, and they're not degraded. Okay? Dealing with pollution, you can clean it up. It's very expensive. This article this week about George Air Force Base in the newspaper takes hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to clean up the fuel, jet fuel that went into the groundwater basin at the old George Air Force Base over here. Or we can prevent it in the first place. If we know that we don't want to get it in there, we prevent it in the first place. So a great example we're looking at here is out in Hinckley, one of the biggest water pollution issues ever in the world happened just down the road here. It's often referred to the Erin Brockovich story because there's a movie about it, and it was a carcinogen, chromium-6, that got in the water. We'll be visiting there, and you guys will be able to see, now that they know it was a problem, because I don't think, they didn't know it was a problem originally. Now, what are they doing to A, clean it up, and how expensive that is, but B, prevent it from happening in the future. Tragedy of the commons, really important. You've got open access to renewable resources. Okay, so let's focus on groundwater. Theoretically, around here, the groundwater, our water basin belongs to everyone. If this is my land here, this classroom, I can sink a well and I can pull out all the water. Theoretically, I can pull out all the water I want. Over there, there's a farmer, and he's an alfalfa farmer. She's an alfalfa farmer. Alfalfa takes a lot of water. They just sink a deeper well, and now they take the water that would have come to me because we're connected underground. Okay, so that if that happens, we call that the tragedy of the commons. This resource is common to everyone, and if there aren't any controls or community understanding of that, then everybody tends to overuse that resource, and they're like, I'm just going to get as much of it as I can before it runs out. Well, locally in our groundwater, there's a judge's order, an adjudication that prevents that. And so everybody has to do their part and only take a certain amount and pay extra for the stuff they do use so that it can be recharged, replenished. But lots of the world, that doesn't happen. Where I came from in South Africa right now, it has to do with grazing. The grassland, beautiful grasslands. The people, since the end of apartheid government, have been given back large tracts of land. But the problem is there's no control. Nobody actually owns that land. They didn't give the people ownership, so they just overuse it. This guy has 10 cattle, that fellow over there gets 12, and that guy gets 14, and next moment the land's overgrazed, the grasses get degraded, they might die out completely and go to desert, a process called desertification, and we've got a tragedy of the commons, and a common issue that we need to manage for, because people without controls, without community understanding, tend to do this. We tend to focus in our own needs at the expense of others. Laws and regulation, private ownership is a big part. If we own that land, then we're automatically going to take care of it better, because we're looking at our sons and daughters and saying, what are we going to pass on to them? If we don't own it, we're like, who cares? They're not going to get it anyway. Okay. Ecological footprint, really important. The amount of biologically productive land and water needed to provide people in a region with an indefinite supply of renewable resources. Okay? Won't go any more than that. You're going to do, you'll see in your syllabus, your extra credit, which counts for up to about almost a half a grade point. So very significant. You just have to go onto one of the sites. If you look at the back of the syllabus, you'll see some of the sites. You're going to do your own footprint. There's little programs you can do to measure based on how far you drive, what you eat, all that. And you'll find that U.S. citizens have a footprint 4 or 5 times, 6 times larger than it should be. That's sustainable. Okay? And you're going to do one, and then hopefully think about that through the class and maybe make some changes. Maybe ride a bike once in a while, maybe eat differently, maybe grow your own food, and do some conservation of various types. And then you're going to measure again and just write a little just chat about it. Write a little mini position paper. It is where, what was this about? Why is this important? What did I learn from it? And that's your extra credit. But this concept of ecological footprint and realizing that we don't have to have such a big footprint, right? People in India have a footprint that's about, I think it's less than half of what other people have. It's a half, less than 1. Okay, so you'll be doing that as an actual project, and this is an important concept, a way to look at where we're at, basically. Okay, natural capital use and degradation. So United States, how much of the footprint do we take up? Okay, we take up about 25% of it, and the per capita, per person is 10. One's the measuring point. We're at 10 times that. Okay. This is interesting. We use 25%, in other words, of the world's natural resources, and population, we're only 5%. That's an interesting way to look at it as well. 5% of the population is using 25% of the world's resources, which begs the question, if we're using most of these resources, a large percentage, well, surely we can do a lot to do better, just in our own personal behaviors, okay? And teaching others to be better. Okay. Leading consumer, China's new affluent consumers. We're going to kind of go over this. This is just a little case study on China. Kind of gives you an idea of what's going on there. So cultural changes can grow or shrink your ecological footprints. There's been several that have contributed to that. First, the agricultural revolution, when we realized we could grow food to where we could have anything we want, sort of any time of the year. The industrial medical revolution made us live longer and want more. The information globalization revolution, if we want kiwi fruit in the middle of winter, we just get them shipped in on a refrigerated plane from wherever they're being grown, South Africa, New Zealand, wherever it is. Okay, and then last of all, these pushed us in a negative way and made us bigger consumers of natural resources. This one's pushing us the other way. Hey, wake up. Are we really sustainable? And this is called the next or second green revolution, where we're saying, can we do better? Can we grow our own food? Can we conserve water? Can we take better care of our soils? Can we compost? Do any of you guys at home have a composting facility for your kitchen waste? Question, anyone got a composting facility? Little composting bin?
I do.
I do.
You do, Mr. Huffine?
Yep.
Good fellow,
I
good fellow.
Use it in my garden.
Yeah, perfect. But not that hard to do, is it?
Oh,
Okay, so cool, thank you. Why do we have environmental problems? Really, there's lots of different environmental problems. You could say climate change, you could say water shortages, but why do we have them? Well, population growth. We have, most people believe, too many people to actually take care of on this world. So if populations continue at an exponential growth, where they're out of control, the J curve, as we call it, then that's a problem. Unsustainable resource use. There's another clear-cut forest. Poverty. People in poverty don't get to make decisions very easily about to be more sustainable. They live in what are called food deserts. We, for many years, had one of these in Atlanta. There was no supermarket there with good, cheap food, and they had to go to the local convenience store to buy their food. So people living in poverty, and there are plenty of people in the United States living in poverty, that's a basic cause of environmental problems. Excluding environmental costs from the market prices, that's the GPI, January Positive Indicator, we already talked about that, and increasing isolation from nature. I really love this one. You guys don't get this as much because you're exposed. You have a dog, and you have a garden, and you can go hiking, and you probably go camping. But people that grow up in the big cities, there's this new word come about called nature deficit disorder, right? These folks just haven't experienced nature. And if they haven't experienced nature and its glory and its beauty and its amazing diversity, and just the feeling of being able to be in it and feel it, then how do we even expect that they're going to care for it, right? Their food just comes out of a packet. They don't even get to see it even being an apple or a potato. They just get it in a little, one of those little TV dinners, right? One of those microwavable dinners. They have no concept of where that comes from. And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about is we need to keep our areas open. Our lands around here need to be open to all people. Even the one I struggle with is people riding off-highway vehicles, OHV vehicles, bikes and four-wheelers and all that. They can be very destructive. But on the other hand, we need them to come, because how are they ever going to appreciate what we've got just here in the Mojave Desert unless they experience it? Okay, there's your population growth. For many, many years, pretty flat. Then we got enough people and a high enough reproduction rate, it becomes exponential, grows very, very quickly. And the question we're going to have to ask ourselves is, where does this level off? Why is it going to level off? What do you guys think? Why would that level off? In other populations, they have boom and bust cycles. They go along, they explode. A couple of years ago, we had an explosion of wood rats out in the desert. Then they do what? They run out of food. They run out of resources, and they start to drop very quickly. And in certain parts of the world, we're starting to have this happen. Water shortages, lack pollution, and waterborne diseases, AIDS. In South Africa right now, AIDS is starting to cause this to happen. And are we going to manage for that, or are we just going to allow that to happen? So that's your population growth. Okay. So another unsustainable uses of resources. This whole idea of affluence, right? We're used to using in an affluent society. You know, in the high desert, we're not wealthy, but we're used to getting what we want. If we want something, we'll ultimately get it. And it kind of causes a thing called affluenza, where we don't really respect what we've got, and we become very, very wasteful. Okay? And how do we prevent that? We need to do better education. And different technologies, and we need to have pollution control and recycling and all those kinds of things. Okay, so are we a highly consumer-driven society and not really taking care of the environmental degradation the way we should have, the waste or the pollution? So that's a cause for environmental problems in itself. China is really struggling with this right now because people now are better paid, and they would like to have all the things that first world countries have, like a car. And now they've got jam-packed streets and air pollution because of that, for example. Okay? So other things is poverty. When you're in poverty, survival needs to supersede concern for long-term environmental impact. You're only worried about getting enough food, right? If you live next to a forest in Africa, you're going to kill that antelope and use what's called bush meat if you can survive, if it's going to help you to survive. You're not going to say, oh no, we've destroyed that particular we're destroying that particular population of duiker or whatever it is, right? So population growth is affected. More children to gather food. Oh, why would people want to have more people in these societies? Well, they think about it more about, well, if I have more people, more children, they can help gather food. They can collect water for me. They can walk down to the local stream, get water for me, and they can care for the elderly. They can care for me in my old age. So in certain cultures, that's how they think about children, is in terms of they don't realize that by having more children, they're making the problem worse. They're thinking, well, these kids, for example, can care for me later. Okay? And of course, with poverty, you're going to have all kinds of health problems. And unfortunately, they're generally focused in most societies, on women and children, because the men kind of take care of themselves. And it mostly comes from malnutrition. We're going to come to that when we get to the food. Inadequate sanitation of water, dirty water, sewage, polluted water is the #1 cause of diseases, and then respiratory diseases. Okay? Market prices of goods and service do not include environmental costs. We've talked about that. And then we're increasingly isolated from nature, or nature deficit disorder. Okay? Then we're going to finish with this. Want you guys to look at this. You're going to be writing in your first discussion kind of how you think about sustainability and your own worldview. But the book breaks it up into 3 main kinds. And one is, #1, planetary management worldview means we've got enough resources, we just need to use them. Stewardship worldview is more where I am, I think. I think we can be better managers of it. A steward was your really good manager in ancient times, or in the Bible, that you put in charge of all your goods and your precious belongings, and things like your children when you were away. That's a steward. So taking better care. And then environmental wisdom worldview that really focuses in on the environment and making sure, and kind of more focused on making sure the plants and the animals are taken care of, not so much about the people. And so you're going to be in there somewhere. And it's just important, doesn't really matter where you are that much. It's important that you start thinking about how you really look at the world, okay? And that's going to be your experience, your upbringing, your spiritual beliefs, all of that's going to focus in there. So, let's see where we are. Okay, 3 big ideas then, just to finish up. We're going to rely more on energy from the sun. We're going to conserve biodiversity, and we're going to mimic the natural chemical and nutrient cycles. Okay? We're going to do full cost pricing. We're going to think about those other costs, and we're going to be more careful in how we use things because of that. Okay? And we're going to find win-win solutions. Okay? So that we can find ways that we can work better with our corporations, our governments, other nations, other communities, so that we can leave this planet's life support system in as good a condition as we have now, and I think we could actually leave it in a better condition. So it's far from doom and gloom. Alrighty, well, I think that's it, you guys. I think that's the last one. What's the use of a house if you don't have a decent planet to put it on? And I think we're all aware that there's a time for action, and it's now. So thanks very much, and Mr. Huffine will communicate with you exactly what the next step is. We'll have our next lecture on Monday morning. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you, Neville.
Thank you.
Okay, we have better part of 30 minutes. That is usually all